This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company coming a Thursday morning. It's December 28th. I have Britt Robson from Min Post here with me today. Britt, we last chatted a week ago, last Thursday, which means since then the Wolves beat the LeBron-less Lakers at Target Center. They went to Sacramento, beat the Kings without Cat, and they lost in Oklahoma City on Tuesday night. So I think, throughout this episode, we can touch on whatever random elements we want to get to from those games. But I wanted to start here. We've talked about this really difficult stretch of games that the Wolves are on. 16 games started December 11th, 16 games where they play teams over 500. All 16 teams are over 500. 11 of those 16 games on the road. We've said that a million different times. It was a stretch that you said you were like, hey, it's a success. You go 8-8 over that time. And the Wolves, and part of that was because the Wolves were 17-4 before this stretch started. So going 8-8 would leave them 25-12. Well, as of today, they do play the Mavs tonight, but as of today, when we're recording this, they're 8 games into that 16-game stretch.
Halfway,
and they are 5-3. Do you have a guess of where they rank offensively and defensively in that stretch?
No, I don't. I imagine it's middle of the pack, though.
Yeah,
I don't think they're starring at either end of the court. I think Sacramento game probably boosted them in some ways,
right?
But I don't think that we haven't seen the Wolves in vintage form. What we know is vintage form in the 23-24 season, and I think Oklahoma City had a lot to do with that the other night, but I also think that there have been games during this 8-game stretch, where they have had a habit, and this is common, of once you're successful, especially if you're newly successful, you have a habit of teasing out things. Procrastinating is what a writer would say.
Yeah.
But as a basketball team, it's waiting for the second half.
So they were in the first 21 games before the stretch started. They were 17-4, like we said. They were number 1 on defense and number 13 on offense. Again, so we enter this with like go 500. Basically we're saying be mediocre. That's fine. And they pretty much have been that in this 8-game stretch where they're 5-3. They're 7th. They've gone to 7th on defense in this time and 22nd on offense. And I was just kind of thinking about that overall. I'm like, okay, yeah, 5-3, like that's solid. 7th or 22nd on offense, 7th on defense, and doing the framing of like the 500 sort of thing. Though I sit here and be like, I think it can be better. I think it could have been better.
Sure.
I think it can be better. And maybe we were doing the 8-8 thing a little bit, too much just because the initial record was so good. I think it's funny how like 22nd on offense and 7th on defense, that's kind of like last season, right? Just in terms of rankings wise. But you understand they've been playing hard teams and doing that. I don't have any like macro critiques on the 8 games other than it's like what has kind of been the main thing over the course of the year. You wish the offense was a little bit better. And that number being 22nd over these last 8 games, you kind of go again, you're like, I wish the offense was a little bit better. So that would be my only real nitpick.
I have a nitpick.
Games. Okay.
And Finch mentioned this at practice yesterday and has mentioned it off and on. And anybody who watches the team knows this. They have a great proclivity of playing 1- and 2-man possessions on offense. And it's maddening. Maybe they throw the ball around a couple of times, but what it still boils down to is a guy dribbling the ball, staring at the defense and figuring out how he's going to beat that defense.
Yep.
That happens so often with this team. Happens with Cat, happens with Ant, happens with Jaden McDaniels.
Sure.
About the only guy it doesn't really happen to is Conley, and that's only because he's smart enough to stay outside the arc and bang in 3-pointers. But, I mean, it happens to Rudy way too much. all these people think that they can take on double teams and drive through seams that aren't there. And actually, Ant is quite good at it, but he's also constantly being alert to the slightest thing that can brush by him. And part of that is because he sees the way stars on other teams are reffed, and he isn't really getting that whistle. But it's a distracting element. It is not the caliber of play, both mentally and athletically, that we have seen from him. And some of that is that this team, when you're on the court with five guys and you're sharing the ball and the passing is crisp and the spacing is wide and you're giving yourself up for your teammate on a better shot most of the time, what is going to happen when you're as talented as the Wolves are in this roster is you're going to have an above average defense. You may not be top 10, but you will be better than you are now. And
offense?
Yes, offense.
Yep. Top 10 offense. Okay.
I think they're capable of being a top 10 offense. I just don't expect the improvement I just talked about I don't think that's baked into their DNA enough. And I'm not going to be greedy. If the defense remains elite, I'll take 13th on offense.
Yeah. Which again is exactly where they were 21 games into the season against a more neutral schedule or quote unquote easier schedule. Yeah.
But I'm tired of this yo-yo dribbling, trying to figure out how I'm going to make it through two defenders ready to stop me. It's just stupid basketball. And I don't understand it other than that they can rely on their defense most of the time. Now that is breaking down a little bit. And part of it is, of course, they're playing better teams. Yeah. But there are two things wrong with this team right now. The mainstays of the starters are selfish with the basketball, and the bench is nowhere near as good on offense as everybody would hope they be. Nas has his moments, and he's fantastic at times. Nah has his moments and is very good at times. But in general, they don't play with a synergy either. And there's blended lineups. So, there's all kinds of reasons for it. But Shake Milton's disappearance has certainly hurt. Troy Brown Jr. coming back to earth, even in lesser minutes. So, you can blame Finch for not giving him more run, but I understand it. That hurts. And I think slow-mo, certainly, I know there are slow-mo apologists out there, and I'm as big a slow-mo guy as there is in many respects, probably not to the point of being an apologist, but the guy continually turns down wide open 3-point shots, and the very few he attempts shows you why. Yeah. And so, therefore, that spacing option is taken away. And that's huge. If you're a guy who wants to magnetize defenders toward you, which he is now forced to do either off the dribble or operating solely at the nail, then that diminishes a great part of his game. Remember when D'Lo was getting off because slow-mo was at the nail, but then able to move outside with D'Lo be inside? They'd vary in and out. Slow-mo had the 3-point line. He was a verifiable 41% shooter for the season. He finished there. And so he's not going to do that now. How about his career average? How about not 22 for 21 for a season? Both numbers on that are obscene. 21 shots in 25 games from deep.
It's interesting. You start that with, right, like too much of the yo-yoing, right, or the focus on isolation, right?
Yeah.
And that's Cat and Ant predominantly.
Right.
But I think you just kind of went to define why it's so much yo-yoing, and that's because there haven't been offensively reliable, additional options for them to go to, or to super rely on the ball movement all the time, because it'll just stop at some point when somebody might not be being guarded, legitimately out
Right.
on the perimeter there. So I kind of get why Cat and like Cat in the second quarter of that Thunder game, you know, it was just kind of like isolation over and over again. And I remember Jim Pete saying on the broadcast is like, it can't be isolation. Like they're coming for it. But I remember stopping there when I was rewatching. I'm like, I'm not sure what the other things to necessarily go to, given what that group on the floor was around him. You know, it needs to be like a deliverance by Cat and Ant to figure that out, but they also need some help from around them. And I think the difference when I look at, okay, they were 13th on offense before this stretch and now they're 22nd. I think the defense dropping hurts the offense a little bit too.
Absolutely.
I
Right.
get why the defense is dropped because they just played better teams. I mean, this is an
Right.
insane stretch
Right.
against like a stud offensive player every single game. But I think that's part of it too. Can you get the defense back to igniting some fast breaks, putting some pace into the game, a Rudy block, a steal here, a deflection, whatever? I think that can, I guess what I'm saying is I think something else needs to bring offense so it seems less bogged down in and around the Cat and Ant touches.
I think both can be true. I would agree with everything you just said, but I would not give them a pass because of it.
Yeah.
I think that what is happening, if you watch that game, the OKC game, I rewatched it, what impressed me, aside from the fact that they're so well coached, is that they play at a high pace and are patient at the same time.
Sure.
The Wolves don't play at that pace and are less patient. Mm-hmm. So it's like the Thunder get up the floor and then they settle in. They you know, Shea has the ball. He's a triple threat. He can hit the mid range. He can draw the foul. He can get to the cup. He's 6'6". People forget how big he is. But then there are 3-point shooters perched around. There's a lot of drive and kick. They got Chet, who's learning how to take things off the bounce. But at the end of the day, they rely on the open man, and they don't mind a few possessions. The Wolves snuffed a few possessions. A few, like 3 passes in, the guy getting the ball was still covered. And the Thunder didn't panic because their pace was crisp. They didn't spend 3 or 4 seconds. Think of how few players other than SGA and occasionally Chet would size up the defense the way they did. And even if they did do that, they didn't spend 3 seconds on it. They spent a half a second on it and then went or then did something. And that decision-making, which Finch has always cited Nas as being the guy who does that well. And Slow-Mo does it pretty well too, except, you know, now he's got this issue with his shooting. But they still, Ant and Cat, need to get off the ball, even if it's just to get on the ball in a better place 2 seconds later. But there needs to be momentum. Right now, there's not momentum in the half-court offense. And I understand that, I grant your point, that better defense, getting turnovers, getting that pace ingrained into your system would be better. But at the end of the day, I think you need both, especially against really good teams. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised they're 5-3, given that I thought the Sacramento game was a stamp game. That was like put that one in with like a half a dozen others that are like, okay, you play like that, you're going beyond the first round. And a lot of the games in this 8-game stretch, well, obviously the losses, but even a couple of the wins have been, pulled it out, gritty ball, good, but not vintage Wolves games.
But the Sacramento game was
a
really, so let's start there.
Okay. That was Ant, for one thing, doing both things, scoring decisively and getting off the ball pretty well.
Yeah. And Rudy played really well in that game offensively.
Yeah.
It was that was, and I guess to set the table a little bit, obviously to remember Towns missed that game.
Right.
And that was just noticeable right away, right? Is the most frequent screening I've seen from Rudy. Like that was really the plan. It was use Rudy, as a screener, because it was and a roller, because it was him and Anderson who started rather than Towns. And I was just kind of thinking about it more broadly through these last two games, Kings and Thunder, the Wolves against small teams, and how a year ago at this time that was the idea of, are these the teams that will play Rudy off the floor? Does this break the double big look? Right. And I think we can make some cases for how more so Oklahoma City than Sacramento did break the double big look. But I don't think at any point you're thinking, well, Rudy had to leave the game. I don't think it was that. Like Rudy was nowhere near being quote unquote played off the floor. The double big look, Rudy and someone else, or more often, I thought Karl and Naz, that got played off. I think that's an encouraging sign that particularly against the Kings, against a smaller, faster team, offensively, Rudy punished, and that in itself, I think is a win, because we haven't really had many signals at all that that fear that Rudy needs to get played off is a thing and all. And I think it's interesting in the context that like the guy that Rudy was guarding in both of those games, Chet Holmgren for the Thunder and Domantas Sabonis for the Kings, played really well offensively and kind of did hurt Rudy. Chet on the pop, Sabonis kind of on the roll, isolation attacks there. But even through that, or at least for me, there wasn't any point in the game where I'm like, well, you need to bench Rudy here and go like smaller and go Cat and Naz. It was the other way, where I was like, once Rudy's off the floor, I'm not sure how this still pretty big team reacts and adjusts to the speed. So I think that's a weird sort of win mixed into this all here, which hits more on the macro, I think, thought of the team too.
And I do think if we telescope it out to the season thus far, the Wolves are 1-1 against the Kings, very obviously. Very obvious loss, very obvious win. They're 1-1 against the Thunder. Not so very obvious win, but a good, tough, solid win and an obvious loss. When they play their game and the other team isn't totally on their game, I mean, there have been a few games, like the Miami game and the Boston game I can think of, where the opponent played extremely well, and they're a quality opponent to boot, and the Wolves beat them. But there are also a lot of games where you're playing a quality opponent that isn't playing vintage or great elite ball, but are playing well. And those are the games, those are kind of the litmus test games for where are the Wolves at the moment, And I thought the Thunder played extremely well. But I would have liked to have seen that be an 8-point loss rather than what could have easily been a 28-point loss. The Thunder played, I think, a little better than they usually do, although the way they're playing now, hard to say. But the Wolves did not play well. And when I was looking for answers too, connections or whatever. I read your tweet about, anybody got any ideas on, what's the common pattern in these losses? Well, what I came up with, at least the last two, was SGA and Embiid are like the two of the 3 or 4 best mid-range shooters in the game. And they also take a ton of them, and they like it. They want you to give them the mid-range game because they will burn you enough that then they can begin to leverage the mid-range game into things you originally were trying to take away. So I asked Finch about that. Do you game plan going in knowing somebody is that good at the mid-range? Do you kind of factor that into your game plan so that, I'm sure you have like crunch time defense where you're saying we need to take that away from this person. do you implement that earlier is what I was going to get to. But Finch wasn't in the mood for any of that. Finch was in the mood to rip his defense. And, he just basically said it had nothing to do with game plans at all. Our defense has been, was been bad for a couple of weeks. We have it at 3 levels. The shell's bad. We have ball contained. That's bad. Then you have gaps. That's bad. Then you have low man. That's bad. I don't understand why it's bad, but it's bad.
Why do you think it's bad?
Well, I think that it's bad because it's the ups and downs of an NBA season, and you're,
right. Nothing's broken. It's just maybe a bit of a lull or something.
And I am heartened by the idea that Finch is not going to rest on this team's laurels.
Sure.
This was exactly the game to say, we got embarrassed. Here are the ways we got embarrassed. Because the team can say, hey, Oklahoma City is good. They're on a run. Everybody would, that game was as much about Oklahoma City being really good as the Wolves not being really good. But you can also make the case that the Wolves weren't really good. And you can also make the case that the Wolves weren't really good in ways that they've been trending to not be very good after being very good. So this is when a coach does need to step in and say, hey, remember who we are? We're not that thing right now. We need to get back to that thing. And that thing is aggressive ball contain. And then if ball contain falls down, being alert enough and hustling enough to fill gaps so that ball contain doesn't get to the rim. And then if it does get to the rim, having that low man come over and be the third line of defense. And what he was saying was that was basically a collective breakdown of all 3 of those areas. And SGA will do that too. He's probably the best guy in the NBA with a possible exception of Luka. Although, I don't even think Luka off the ball is as big a threat. I mean, when Shea has got the ball moving toward the rim, I think he's the biggest threat in the NBA right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with, right? I mean, and again, that's what's been sort of interesting about this stretch of games that the Wolves are on. It is really a different type of dynamic threat that they're facing every game. And I just think like the Kings and Thunder game were interesting there too, because you have both like Fox and SGA as these options that to get downhill, to play off a ball screen action, to do all of those sort of things. And yeah, like if Shea's getting into the mid range and hitting those shots like that, that's going to be tough. I think what stands out to me though in those 2 games is what the roll man did, and in very different ways. Sabonis and Holmgren, and how like Fox could come off of it, and then he just would like sort of wait a half a beat for Sabonis to like flare off a little bit or roll up Gobert a little bit, and Sabonis hurt Gobert in sort of a now what becomes a one-on-one isolation situation off of that initial pick and roll action. And then Chet the same way. He's using the roll action of that, but more in the pop, and Rudy's needing to navigate that space to recover out to him while also wanting to defend the rim. I think in what has been a defensive player of the year season for Rudy Gobert, like that's that one thing, right? Can he turn that up? And now you do that, like he's probably already going to win defensive player of the year. But he's established this shell. He's inspired this defense. He's done all this stuff. Can you build that fence, but also be like the pointy spikes at the top of the fence, doing everything that Rudy does for the defense as a whole? But can you also shut that down? Can you shut down Sabonis there too? And I know that's asking a ton for Rudy. But if he does that, right? If he grows a little bit more or gets back to some of his elite one-on-one defense, in addition to the shell, in addition to playing in coverage, now you put yourself up in the MVP conversation, the all-star, that sort of thing, or all NBA, because I think that might be what this team needs to sustain like the 1 seed the entirety of the season is Rudy to do everything that he does, but also everything he does for the team, but also a little bit more to, neutralize those superpowers that are coming at him one-on-one. And the same thing goes for defending Shea. Like I thought Shea went at him too much. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. But let's remember that Fox and Sabonis were shut out in the fourth quarter of that game.
Good point.
And so Sabonis did hurt Rudy a lot in the third quarter, I thought, and then occasionally early, not quite as chronically early. And I think some of that had to do with the fact that Fox was a one-man team before then.
Right.
And so I think what they did is they began to overplay Fox, and therefore Sabonis was able to get those isolations in a better position on the floor.
Yeah.
And so I think some of that was a natural reaction. And as much a part of the leadership of the defense as Rudy is, and it's another question I asked Finch that he didn't want to answer. He just wanted to rip yesterday. So I wanted to talk about trust, because I thought Rudy began to look like old Rudy last year when SGA continued to get to the cup. Like, what's going on here? I have to go guard this guy now, and nobody is filling back for me on this. Cat was obviously, he's questionable today. Makes sense. He just wasn't, he wasn't moving well. Anybody who's watched the game saw that. I mean, kudos, I guess, to him for wanting to play, but it turned out to be a loss, I think, in terms of the Wolves' effectiveness. But in terms of what your better point is, or your greater point is, I agree that the hybrid scheme of Wolves roaming and Utah rim protection, I mean, that's a very simplistic way to put it, but Rudy has to maintain a very fine balance and has to have both the instincts to know that that balance is being skewed. But the only way he gets that measurement accurately is if his teammates can be trustworthy. And I don't see his teammates being trustworthy. I have a tendency, I think, to rip Ant because my bar for him is unreasonably high. But I think Ant is not playing at the level. He has his games like Sacramento, and he has his moments in every game. But when they were on that, 6-game winning streak, or 11 out of, they won 21 out of 25. And in the meat of some of that really good stuff, Ant was, well, I mean, I don't know if this is still true, but the Wolves have one of their lowest defensive ratings is when Ant's on the floor. And that defense from Ant is crucial to this team. I mean, Ant can be such a force on defense, and he can also disappear. It's like.
So do you think that's like navigating some like in-season fatigue, which again is like a normal thing, but now you're like 25 games in, and I think it's watching Luka play last night too. And it's like, he's not doing anything on defense. Upright, whatever, like, and Luka does that because he's just conserving energy. And I'm not making the argument for that. No,
I agree.
But it's when you are that playing that role on your team's offense, I never know what like the right amount of expectation is to put on that player then defensively. My inclination is to need a little bit more from Ant. I'm definitely noticing that in the Thunder. You go back and watch the Thunder game and a lot of the easy clips that the Thunder had. Anthony Edwards is like one pass away, one help away. He's the gap help in that there too. And I mean that I've never gotten to the point with Ant where I'm like, this is an elite defender or this is a high end defender. It's always can get there. It's not consistently there.
And he has had like 4 or 5 game stretches where he's stacked really good defensive performances where I'm close to anointing him at that level.
Yeah.
But it isn't there yet. I agree. One thing I will say, when I watch him in the locker room going to or from the shower or getting changed or, just going over to somebody, he's not moving easily. I mean, I think I pointed it out to you when we were there the other day. I think he's still got a slight hitch in his walk. Yeah, he's got a sore hip. And, if you're an elite athlete at the age of 22 and you're walking a little funny, you have more than a sore hip, according to most people. You know what I mean? I mean, he's got a deep bruise on his hip, or something he clearly is not trying to gain sympathy from anybody walking around the locker room, where he kind of mentally at least feels like he's in his own cocoon where nobody is seeing him. I think that he's still a little dinged up, and I don't know how much of that affects him mentally when he's got to be that gap help and or whatever. Also
maybe just some subconscious conservation.
Also he's getting increasingly pissy with the refs, and I think that may have something to do with it. When you're not 100% physically, and you're still going what you regard as 100%, but you're not getting the results you want. This could all be telescoping. It could just be that he is in a mental slump. But I think that just seeing him walk a little bit gingerly, at the age he's at, he's not playing a ton of minutes. He's not, there's nothing to suggest that Ant, deserves to be beaten down right now. And yet I don't think that the fluidity, he can turn it on. He's still getting through 4 defenders occasionally and banking it in, but, so that's part of it too.
I did kind of like when I was watching the Thunder game, but I put down, this kind of reminds me of Ant in a back-to-back. And I wasn't thinking about like any lingering damage from his injuries or whatever. Right. And maybe that is what it was. I was just, I think understandably, it was like, it was Christmas yesterday, it kind of,
and he's had some issues,
Yeah. He's had some issues with that in particular, like kind of, being able to sustain through that. So I don't know. I mean, this is the middle of the season, right? You're now dealing with your star players not being 100%. You've relied really heavily on your top, your starting 5, your top 8. This is the time of year where even if you go, people talk about like, oh, who's going to be the 9th man, right? Is it Troy Brown? Is it Shake Milton? Is it Jordan McLaughlin? And a frequent retort there is like, doesn't matter. Like, because come the playoffs, that 9th guy's not going to play. And that's totally right. I do wonder for the regular season point of that, and if we're, putting a lot of weight on being the 1st or 2nd seed or whatever in the West, if you go, we might be entering the time where those players are going to be needed to sort of weather the storm, even if they're not going to skip the rotation come the playoffs. And the things to reference there would be Ant looking like he's still sore after games with his hip. Carl obviously didn't look physically himself in that last game. We've also seen on a lot of nights Carl doing like little leg stretch things. He's looked like he's just had some lower body irritation for most of the season. That just kind of like comes with the territory of being a high usage 28-year-old. Like that stuff is gonna happen. It's, the Wolves really try to play through stuff, but pretty much every night when I'm turning on League Pass, it's like, oh yeah, Donovan Mitchell's missed the last 4 games. It's just like those guys miss time. This 82 game season is stupid. It limits the quality of play. Like that is, we so obviously know that now. So I don't think any of this is like an indictment of like Pat and Ant or whatever. It's just like, yeah, staying 17-4, winning at that level is probably going to be really difficult to do. Not because your team isn't that good. It's just hard in the NBA to sustain anything because you get tired.
And tell it to Mike Conley, right?
and that's fair too. But man, we both
know I know
there's guys.
Well, I mean, and everybody should be crossing their fingers or whatever superstition you have. Yeah. Just say, keep that Mike Conley mojo, that healthy anti-voodoo doll he's got somewhere, in a place where he does not go down. Because I will tell you, we've seen enough second unit performance to know that at the very least, if Na comes in because he has to become the starting point guard, and you get a redo of Ant January 2023, where he was the primary playmaker or whatever, both of those fixes are going to fade fast. And meanwhile, your second unit is in shreds. I mean, Slow-Mo is your guy, but he can't bring the ball up necessarily. And it's just, it's another chapter on how valuable Mike Conley is. And, I thought Jordan McLaughlin's line the other night was just the quintessential Jordan McLaughlin line. I mean, he played like 8 minutes or something. Yeah. He was 1 for 5. He had 3 steals, 4 assists.
And multiple offensive rebounds. I remember that. I don't know. He had multiple
coming out of the blue, getting the ball, never having the ball in his hands for any more than a second. He's just a beautiful player until everybody leaves him alone. He catches it from somebody.
Yeah, Jason and I were talking about that yesterday too, and I was like, "That's the one thing I need to because I've done this 10 times over the last 3 years, where I'm like, Jordan McLaughlin, I think they need to play him more, and every time I need to remind myself of well, they will adjust to the lack of shooting there. Now, if J-Mac can, that funky form, fling in 36, 37% of them.
Exactly.
Then it's then I'm to the point where I'm like, yeah, maybe he should be the 9th man. But we've been here before. And that is the thing, that gets in the way there. But And
that is the blister on Finch's game plans. If somebody can't shoot, they're not going to stay in the lineup.
Unless they're Kyle Anderson.
Well, except that Kyle Anderson, what he's forgiving about Kyle Anderson is not that he misses shots, it's that he doesn't take shots. That's where Slow-Mo is hurting the team right now. And Finch is smart enough to know that. I think what Finch is doing is fighting the long game. I'm going to be totally out of my wavelength here. I don't know this to be a fact at all. But I imagine right now there is an eternal internal struggle as to whether or not this team can afford to keep Slow-Mo after this year. And Mike Conley now is a lock. Any comments about who will it be, Conley or Slow-Mo, that argument is over. So if that argument is over and you're not going to trade Cat and you're going to keep Nas, then the idea of keeping Slow-Mo, given his current performance, is not tenable. It's not something that this team can do. And Finch is 75 times more aware of all of this intricacies of this than I am, and is, I think, trying to let Slow-Mo, give him enough rope to either play his usual Tarzan thing or hang himself,
It's a tricky one, with Slow-Mo, but because I'm not sure really, what the alternatives are. Obviously one people are going to reference is the shiny new toy that hasn't been used yet. And that's,
you mean
Leonard Miller, Josh Minot, whatever. Yeah. I think
I think the stakes are too high for that.
I do too.
I mean, I you know me, I'm big on Minot. I'm bigger on Miller than you are, but I'm a huge Minot guy.
Well, the reason you say big is like, I just think it's going to take Leonard Miller a couple of years to be able to fit into one of the best teams in the league, just from a discipline and all that sort of stuff. So I guess I just say that, and would love to be proven wrong. Maybe they do just go, okay, you start having Leonard Miller be taking some minutes here and there. Maybe when guys start missing some time, I'd love to be proven wrong. My just hesitation in with that is kind of a lot of the stuff we talk about with Ant, which is just youth stuff, shot selection, defensive awareness, those sort of things. Obviously, Leonard Miller's a really good athlete who can create a shot pretty much whenever he wants.
Right.
And he can make really great defensive plays. But what does that look like in, a 5-person defensive shell? At least with Kyle Anderson, Kyle is going to be doing his job there. But to be fair, and I'm not making this argument, but maybe what other people are arguing is like, well, Dane, you've just been talking about how offense is the problem. Maybe there are sacrifices that you make to the defense. Kyle Anderson has been really good at defense, really bad at offense. Maybe you lean more into offense. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think also, you just kind of march along, and a lot of these things will fix themselves. You're a really good team. But it's sort of about, I don't think you want to be here a month, 6 weeks from now and going, yeah, that was another 6 weeks where they were a below average offensive team. Like at some point to reach the aspirations that I think the fan base has, the front office has, the coaching staff, the players have, of being a really good team, you need to find a way to more consistently be a good offensive team. And I think that's part of the journey of this season is trying things, navigating that. Also, I can't help but remember previous seasons where the calendar shifted to January 1st and this team almost out of nowhere became an elite offensive team. That's happened multiple times, and it's been fueled by ball movement. Maybe it just is. I don't even know how to wrap my head around what that is, but it's happened multiple times. And after 30 games, this team was like, all right, we get that ball movement is super necessary for us to have success. We do it. And then the defense or the offense just gets way, way better. I think that's probably the answer, more so than a trade or a shift in the rotation. I think it's hope just kind of plugging along and finding a mid-season rhythm offensively, which you've done with this group, multiple times in the past few years.
And I guess where I'm coming from is when I say there's too much at stake, this is not a team that you want to start tinkering with your not ready players yet. Because, and I'll be frank, if they keep the number 1 seed the entire season, I will be surprised. What I regard as a successful regular season is one of the 4 spots that gets you hosting the first round. That to me, and that's going to be a really good team. Because I will tell you, Memphis with Ja and now Marcus Smart, that's a different team. The Clippers are for real all of a sudden. Everybody now is in sync. Ty Lue's got them going. OKC, Denver, Dallas, New Orleans. I mean,
Sacramento.
Go down the list. Sacramento. Getting one of the top 4 seeds in the Western Conference will require them to play about as well as they've already played, because other teams, and also let's keep in mind that the Wolves have been extraordinarily fortunate with the schedule makers and with injuries. They've had a rest advantage on other teams. And it's going to happen again tonight. Dallas played last night. At home. They're coming up here on a back-to-back while the Wolves have hung out. So, I mean, that's enormous. And that has happened 3 or 4 times as often as the reverse this season. And meanwhile, 2 games without Zion against the Pelicans. Got Memphis at least twice, I think, without Ja.
Yep.
These things nobody can predict them, and certainly the Wolves have been on the wrong side.
Yeah, I don't think you're saying this to take away from it. It's just like, that has skewed good. And even just like the back-to-backs thing has skewed great thus far for the Wolves. They've only had 2 of them, and I think they have 13. So for the rest of the season, they're going to have 11 more back-to-backs. Like some of that, it's going to go multiple different ways. And the odds are maybe not going to have as much of the matchup luck or the rest luck there. I don't think it's been like huge or massive. I don't think it's reason to believe there's going to be a major shift. I just think it's like it's just a good reminder to be like, yeah, to sustain being one of the top seeds in the West, it's probably going to require getting marginally better over the course of the year and, picking that low-hanging fruit that's out there. Because again, in this difficult 8-game stretch, it's starting to move in a different direction. You're starting to play like a 5 seed after a 5 through 8 seed rather than the first 20 games of the season you played as a top.
And I tweeted out at some point, I can't remember what their record was, and I said if the Wolves go 500 the rest of the way, they'll have a 48-win season or something.
Yeah.
And somebody immediately kept back. That'll be a massive disappointment to people. And I'm saying to myself, 48 wins, in the Western Conference is a massive, and fans are now expecting, okay, you're playing 750 ball, play 750 ball. We've seen it. We want more of it. Sure, you want more of it. But if this team can be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference through the dog sled days of February and March, when everybody is grinding and the schedule turns a little easier for them, but also has more back-to-backs or whatever, I still think anywhere from 48 to 56 wins is about where this team was going to wind up landing. And I think that 48 wins might get you the 4 seed. It might get you the 5 or 6 seed. And that's big. And that's why, to bring it all full circle on an incredibly circuitous conversation, why I think the Minots and the Millers are not in the rotation, because Sacramento lost to Portland the other night. Boy, that feels like a big ding in their schedule right now.
Sure.
That's
what I was just going to say, man, is it's like, what the Wolves have done this year consistently all the way through is they haven't had one of those.
Right.
They haven't had one of those. They've, they beat the Pacers without Halliburton. They beat the Lakers without LeBron. I mean, they've had a lot of these. They beat Zion, those times without him. Maybe no Luka.
But they beat him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And
right, exactly.
And we do the thing so much of it, like, oh, lucky you're playing so and so on a back-to-back, or oh, and I do this. I'd be like calling myself out.
Sure.
Of like, oh, lucky so and so isn't playing in this game. Well, to get that to the mid-50s sort of thing, part of it is just lining those up and knocking them down. And if Luka doesn't play tonight, line them up, knock them down. And to the Wolves' credit, which obviously we know they did not do at all last season, it was about one of those Blazers blemishes every 10 days or something. Credit to them for being able to do it. That's what's going to make them a great regular season team. And people say that like, great regular season team, don't know about the playoffs. Well, if you are a great regular season team, you can fine tune along the course of the season. You're lining those up, you're knocking them down, and then you get another Thunder matchup coming up in a couple weeks or whatever. And you're like, all right, let's see what we can do against this. Let's test ourselves in a more of a playoff concept. Make some adjustments against these teams like that. That's the thing. Let's be good during the regular season. And when these things that test us, like a Kings team does, like a Thunder team does, or like a Lakers team on Saturday who can go big, there's all these different things where you're like, let's keep plugging along. And when a test comes, let's answer that test, because we know one of these ways, probably multiple of these ways, are going to test us in the playoffs. And to that end, I think it's I don't have complaints. I don't have complaints with what this is. It's like, but keep that same business mindset that they've seemed to have the whole year. And then, line them up and knock them down.
Well, and I don't know what the current math is. I haven't done it recently, but I would guess that the Wolves' current record, 22-7, a little bit more than 3 wins for every loss, translates 60-20 is 3 wins for every loss.
Yeah.
So we're on a 60-win pace right now.
Mm-hmm.
For this team to play as well from here to the middle of April as they have played thus far means that they will win more than 60 games after winning 42 last year against a Western Conference that I would argue is much tougher than it was last year. So I can revel covering a team that grinds people down and plays elite defense and has thrilling performances against the Heats and the Celtics and the storied franchises playing great ball without losing perspective of the idea that this may turn into a 55-win season or a 51-win season or a 48-win season, and that the bulk of the work over the course of the season should still be regarded as something that is admirable. It's an admirable performance by a basketball team, the likes of which we have not seen. So, am I going to criticize the team? Am I going to call them arrogant when they only win by 2 against Charlotte or whatever? Yeah, I'm prone to that. But at the end of the day, you want to take satisfaction in what is happening because it's good hoops, and that's why we're all here. At the same time saying, let's not be assholes about this. Let's not say, hey, we had steak 4 nights a week before. What is this bullshit roast beef tonight?
No, I think this is like I'd say for me is like the learning process of covering and, figuring out a team that's playing on a different level than I've ever covered before. I mean, you in 35 years have only really covered one team at all like this, 2003, 2004.
And it had that magical quality too. I mean, all of a sudden, Fred Hoiberg, Irvin Johnson, Trenton Hassel. I mean, they weren't doing this that year.
Right. It's been just personally, it's been like an interesting thing to, cover this level of team, given the caliber of teams that I've covered before. And I think, a lot of people who listen to this, have listened to us for years, have known that that's kind of the way we look at this stuff. And it was easier to do with completely flawed teams or pretty somewhat flawed teams. Think about like the Pat Bevan Vandal team, know, and I've had to like check myself a couple times of being like, just I guess as simple as, am I being too negative? And like, am I being too nitpicky with it? And I think part of it is, I guess, my bias of just how I've always done it is that's the way I look at this team. And I'm always like, where can it get better? It is an interesting thing to ask yourself, where can I get better stuff when it's already pretty good, really good.
Right. Well, for me, and I think actually to some extent for you, which I think one of the reasons we converse well is because I don't want to ride the crest of a wave. I want to basically find where I'm going against the grain a little bit. And what that does is makes me go deeper into my assumptions at the same time that I'm trying to get a different perspective and context, forcing myself not to say, all right, they're great. Let me gush here. Let me gush here. Because you can do that. And you should do that as part of what you do, because that's what you're seeing. But like I said, this team is not going to be this good all year unless it's just some phenomenal growth. It's, where they're playing at a 60 win pace.
Mhm.
And so let's look at, as the games go along, where the drop off may be inevitable. We just got through talking about it fairly extensively, and where the sustainability can be. And that's why I'm heartened actually by Finch saying, I believe that we have a sustainably great defense. We're just not playing it right now. I mean, that's the message.
And I agree with that too. Yeah. I
agree with that too. And if there is a reason why I would say, 60 games, why not? It would be because I've seen this team wear down people. I would say rub them out, but I know what happens when that happens. So now that the kids have schooled me on what that means.
Yeah. Your timing on that one wasn't great, given what else was in the news. I do. Yeah, I'm enjoying it, I guess, is what I want to say. It's like, I even just like the Kings and Thunder game, I thought it was like, personally for me, like, I'm going into these games and I'm just interested in, like, these teams play a different way. And, like, in theory, a way that punctures some of the things that I have concerns about with this Wolves team. And I enter into these games thinking about it like that. And then it's awesome to have those things affirmed, or I guess denied, watching that Kings game and being like, wow,
Right.
that was like the team I was kind of most worried about in the West. And they showed me something in that Kings game. Again, you got to run it through the context of, like, that was a back-to-back for the Kings or whatever. And Carl didn't play. What does it look like with that? But I go, man, power to them. I think the Kings are a good team. And I think they can pummel you at times. And they didn't, without Cat, they didn't let themselves get pummeled, and so I leave that very, believing in continued growth for this team. And then the Thunder, throw you something the next game, and you start at, like, questioning what were my biases related to a Thunder matchup previously, where I was like, I'm I came into that Thunder game less concerned about the Thunder because I'm thinking back to the play-in game of last year. I'm like, I don't know, kind of feels like this is one of those teams that the Wolves can really assert their physical dominance against. And I think about the Thunder game from earlier this season, where they handled them well at Target Center, and then they lose to them, the other night. And you go, well, okay, let me recalibrate. I don't know what the answers are, but if I'm adjusting and I'm asking why, what's different? Like, what was I underrating about Oklahoma City here and what they could do against the Wolves? It makes, for me, it makes for it to be a really interesting puzzle to sort of navigate, and not one to ever condemn, but to be like, it's fun to cover a team that I believe has answers to just about every question. To get to them, it might take time, and they're going to need to be a real commitment to it. But I think this team has answers for just about everything. Are they going to be able to find those and execute those? I can't wait to find out.
And to me, and we're all prone to bouts of laziness. We have lives, et cetera,
particularly right now. There's like this last week or so, you're like, ugh.
But at the end of the day, when I'm locked in, the more you know about the game, the more fun it is to learn other things, to add to your knowledge. I mean, that's the thing that I have a long history with this team, but I also watch a lot of NBA, and you can get to the point where you think you know a lot, and then you find out, oh, I didn't know that. And I didn't know that. And it's because the games keep coming and the world keeps changing, and it keeps bringing you up to the present moment. If you're alert enough to stay in the present moment, the game will keep teaching you things that are so satisfying to learn. I mean, I know that this is probably, kind of it sounds defensive, and perhaps on some context it is. But when I make a mistake, it is not that unpleasant to me. I mean, I've made enough of them. I'm kind of used to it. But also, it's an opportunity to say, oh, I didn't know that. This is what I assumed, just what you said. I mean, I thought the Thunder was a good matchup for the Wolves. And all of a sudden, new things in the equation. Yeah. Maybe not. And that ambiguity, it makes you thirsty
for the next game.
Let's see another game.
Yeah, no, totally.
And so, I mean,
and not living and dying with it, right? Not being like, right. And to reference back to like the Rudy and Utah stuff, everything was painted in such black and white generalities.
Yeah.
Generalizations. I don't think that's a word. Generalizations of like a Rudy team can't do this. Well, no, a Rudy team can get exploited by that. That doesn't mean it is a truth,
Right.
And just because clearly the Thunder messed with the Wolves in the middle of the floor, right? Navigating Chet on the pop and navigating Shea going downhill into the mid-range doesn't mean that the Wolves can't defend a stretch big. It doesn't mean that. We've actually seen them doing that. We've seen Rudy do that. It's interesting when it doesn't work because it makes you go, all right, like I went into that Thunder game and I'm like, me and you do this before every game. We're sitting next to, we're like, how do you think they're going to match up here? Right. Like who's Rudy going to guard? Who's Towns going to guard? And I would have for sure gone into that Thunder game been like, yeah, this makes sense to put Rudy on the Chet thing. Look what he did the last time they played the Thunder. And I sit here today and I go, after now watching it again, you don't want to be too reactionary, but you ask yourself, I don't know, maybe should have they put Rudy on Giddey and had him lurk?
Right. And have Jaden on Chet where,
or Cat,
Chet is not quick enough to give Jaden that problem and then put Nah on his cousin, which is always, it's the, I mean, it is.
Those things are fun. For me, those things are fun to think about and not of like, this is for sure an answer or this is for sure a problem, but like, hey, this is what happened here. What's going to happen the next time when they play that? Anthony Davis on Saturday, in many ways, is going to play similar in that pop as Chet Holmgren did. How are the Wolves going to handle that? Oh, now you add in the wrinkle of LeBron's in this game now too. We know how they handled it before. Like I love that stuff. I love thinking about it, and I think it's how many of those answers do you find over the course of the season prepares you for how good of a postseason team I think you're going to be able to be, because you've now been tested, in all these different areas that are theoretically your weaknesses or are weaknesses of your team. And you go, all right, do we have an answer for those? And the Wolves don't have an answer for every one of those right now. It doesn't mean 30 games from now they won't. That's what this season, that's the way I'm viewing this season, is like, how many of these answers can we find over the course of the year? So when you get that first round playoff matchup against Dallas or whoever, you go, all right, these are the answers they have for this team. This is what they're going to try to exploit. Let's harken back to previous things that have happened over the course of the season. We're getting a lot of information.
And then
off those things.
On top of everything else, what is kind of fun is that if Josh Okogie doesn't suddenly become insanely hot from outside and Lou Dort doesn't become insanely hot from outside, those are closer games. At the same time, you don't change your defense to stop Lou Dort from deep or Josh Okogie from deep necessarily. I mean, these are the other things that are like the unforeseen variables that may or may not have any meaning. It may just be that they're random positives, random negatives. Why is Ant going 3 for 17 some game or whatever? It's like anyway. That's I guess what I'm trying to say is that as Timberwolves fans go through this phenomenally successful season, probably the most successful season any of us have gone through with Minnesota, we remain a little over a third of the way through. We got a lot of basketball left. We have no idea what fate is going to throw at us in terms of injury or whatever. But we have seen the belief of the front office and the head coach ratified. We have seen that what they thought could happen can happen. That to me is the big takeaway thus far, is that this wasn't a surprise to Tim Connelly and Chris Finch. I mean, when I did my big interview with Finch, I baited him on this shit. I mean, would you do the Rudy deal over again? And how are you going to do this? And how about this? And he was not in a position of strength and had to concede. Well, last year didn't go the way it was going. But when I pushed him a few times, he basically just gave me a look and said, hey, full stop. We would do the Rudy deal the same way today. We don't think about going back on that. We're committed to going forward. And it was a marker laid down, and it looks a hell of a lot better now than it did only 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And kudos. I mean, kudos to Finch and Connelly and everybody in that front office who not only got Gobert here for what I regard still as too much, but certainly more justifiable now, and then surrounded that core of Ant, Cat, Jaden, whatever, with Mike Conley, Slow-Mo, Nah. That's, that's how you make a team. And that much we know. We know that Cat and Rudy, and that's what the national media knows now, which is why, Steve Ashburn of NBA.com was at the practice the other night. We're gonna see more national media, and we're going to see narratives. Sam Addick in the Athletic, can the Wolves win a championship? It certainly looks like it. Well, that's the careen in the opposite direction, of course. First we'll ignore them and then we'll anoint them. But, even so, we're going to see more of that because it's a fun dynamic happening right now.
I was listening to Dunked On, Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue, and they do like Western Conference, go through all the Western Conference teams, spend like 5 to 8 minutes on each of them. And it is funny how, whenever I have listened to a podcast or read an article really on the Wolves over the course of time, naturally that question comes up. Would you do it again? Would you still do the trade? And it's interesting to hear people talking about that now when the Wolves are the number one seed in the West. And I don't really, I don't agree with this, but like those two, Duncan and LaRue, were still on. They wouldn't do it, and again, don't think I really agree with that, but kind of respect it, respect for like,
well, I think I don't think I would do the deal either. I mean, I just think,
well, that's what I was going to get to is.
Yeah. I mean, I think the draft picks, I think the treasure involved, and what people always leave out of the equation, what could you have gotten as a front office out of Beasley, Pat Bev, and Jared Vanderbilt? What's a shrewd personnel trader like Tim Connelly when he takes a look at what he needs in that roster and has those 3 assets and all those draft picks still as capital to pair, and by the way, Walker Kessler. It becomes then, I mean, this is the point I made to Finch that got his hackles up, and probably rightfully so, but if you had Walker Kessler and then you make a trade for Mike Conley and do the D'Lo deal, look at that roster with all your picks and whatever you want to get for Beasley, Vando, whatever. I mean, I think that's a compelling argument.
I think there's a lot of butterfly effect elements in there too, of like, if you don't do that, then particularly considering Utah was involved in both of the trades,
Understand. Yeah. And also, I would also say that draft picks, first rounders, multiple first rounders and everything, the cachet on that, the hype is almost always bigger than the reward. You know, I mean, I don't know many teams that have really cashed that well. You know,
I guess my question just is then, what does Rudy have to do? Like, is there a level? Is there a level he can get to? Because I think there is. I think it's what I was talking about earlier.
Mhm.
I really do like, and I'm not saying it's fair, but like there has to be some point. I guess I'm lumping you in here too, and the others out there
Sure.
who say no to the trade. Like, there has to be some point where Rudy is so good that you relent on that and you give that up. And I think, and I don't know if Rudy's going to do this, but I think he's already been the defensive player of the year. And I think there's some more things he can do defensively. I think he can be even better defensively. We've seen it before. We've seen him be better in one-on-one situations previously in his career in Utah. And we've kind of put out to sea the idea that he's deteriorating defensively. Like, we've seen this before. He's done so much to play in coverage, to play in zone, to do the shell, that I think he's gotten 10, 15% worse in some one-on-one assignments. I don't think that means he's worse than that. I think he can get even better at it. I think he can get back to where he was there. And now you're like, okay, the defensive player of the year is 10 to 15% better. That's something. Can he get 10 to 15% better offensively too? I think so. I think in 15 more games over the course of this season, I think they're going to this pick and roll more often. That's where he gets his best offense generated. I think we're seeing him being a better offensive rebounder. Can he do more of that? Can he sustain that? Can he do those things? Because if he can do those things, and if he is a top 10, 15 player in the league, which I think he becomes if he does those things, it's like, man, now you got 3 top 20 players on your team.
I get it. And to the again, that argument is not off base. It's just that I'm not on the same basis that you're on. But that I don't think that what you say is inaccurate. I guess what I would go back and look at is what I said when the deal was made, which was this has to make the Wolves perennial first round or better teams, and they need to be a championship contender at least one of those years. They need to be in the conference finals, and they need to be past the first round on a regular basis for this trade to be worthwhile.
Yeah.
And that can still happen, but there's 3 years left. And
well, that's what the Dunk Down guys were saying was like, maybe my answer would be different if I knew that they would have a couple of bites if it wasn't just this year and that was it. And that's I mean those.
And I think that's possible. And I'm not. I guess what I should have said is I'm not right today. I wouldn't do the deal, but I would do the deal a lot more than I would have done it 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I could get swung. When you say what's it going to take, I tend to look more in terms of team performance because I think when you make a deal that sacrifices so much of what you use to make a team better, then the team performance has to be how you judge the trade. And so if the Wolves get past the first round this year and are even better next year and go to the conference finals, then I'm on board. I would say, hey, I didn't think it was possible, or I had a benchmark when the trade was made. They reached that benchmark. All credit to them. And right now that's still in play both ways. I mean, it could work, it could not work. But right now, Rudy is certainly, he is one of the most important players, if not the most important player. I would still argue Ant, but he is one of the most important players on a number one seed. It's a place he's been before, but I do think that the surrounding personnel can give him those improvements on both sides of the ball that you're talking about, and that might happen. And then if this team grows up enough and Ant is playoff Ant that he's been in the past, and Cat is over the things that used to plague him and may still plague him coming up, and Mike Conley's health holds, then we may see this, and then you just, then you're along for the ride. It's a party, Hey, give me more of this.
That's what I'm saying is like, I guess I don't agree with the idea that this party is 1 year.
Oh, right, and I don't necessarily agree with that either.
And I know, and here, hold on, let me do it, because I'm less. Your argument is different than theirs. Their argument was it's just this year. Then it's
I don't agree with that.
And it's going to be Conley and Anderson are gone, and
Conley will not be gone.
Exactly, and I think that's the part of this that if we want to have on December 28th, was assessing the Rudy Gobert conversation is. And what makes it different than 2 months ago is I think there is a world where I believe in a world where Conley is back more than I did 2 months ago. And even more importantly, I believe in a world where Mike Conley is back next year as a 37-year-old and isn't washed. Conley, he's been on the Wolves for 53 games. He's played in every single one of them through 6 different back-to-backs. Like that, we need to, I know we have this fear like he's going to magically break down or whatever, but we need to look in the past and be like, Conley has sustained. Let's maybe not think of him as a 36-year-old.
Right.
And so next year when he's a 37-year-old, let's not bake in a high likelihood of deterioration. That always is going to exist because he's 37. And let's not rule out the idea that the Wolves will, for a year, next year, pay the second apron tax. We don't know, but I don't know. I just saw Woj tweet something like they for sure bought the team or whatever. I still don't even know how that entire thing works. Yeah, he's got a little picture of Laurie and A-Rod. They have a December 31st deadline. Like it's coming.
Right.
Like, do we think, I mean, and I know the financial ramifications are massive, but do we really think that A-Rod and Laurie are going to buy this team and next season is going to be their full year of actual full autonomy of it? And they're going to be like, nah, let's chill. Like, we're going to
we won 55 games last year, so we're gonna pull back, and a first round playoff win will be enough.
That's not going to happen. If that's not going to happen, then we need to. Then let's not only think about this season as the way in which to define this trade. And I think that's why I'm getting to the point. I guess to my answer to this is like, much like we were talking about with the games and learning the season, like. Let's feel this out as it goes. We're gathering more information over time. And the only nitpick I really have on the trade at this point, I'm just making myself focus on the success of the team because that matters. They're 22-7. The only thing that I hit on, and it's the thing I had back then that I have not moved on, is I would have made my all-in trade when Ant was 25, not when he was 21. That's just, that is the one thing. But that's my one looming thing. But if they get to a conference finals, if they present themselves more assuredly as a really big threat this year or next season, then whatever. It doesn't matter if it's 21 or 25, whatever. They got a team now, and I think it just gets brushed over a little bit too much.
And back to your original point of Duncan's assumptions, Tim Conley, when he first came, kind of irritated me because I thought he was evasive in a lot of he used fudgy language or basically didn't answer the question. And I think what I have seen since then is that he can be evasive because he doesn't want to talk, and sometimes that's smart. But when he says something directly, he's not bullshitting you. I mean, when he said, we'll make every effort to sign Nas, I went, I don't know about that. He did. And when he said, I mean, the first question, I was the one who asked it. The first question of Media Day was, do you think you're going to go sign Mike Conley? Or how do you feel about all this? And he said, our hope and plan is for Mike Conley to finish his career in Minnesota. That was a flat out statement.
Yeah.
And that was said before, when the team's record was 0-0. And I think I would almost take it to the bank, and it's not my bank, so it's easy to take it to the bank, that the Wolves will re-sign Mike Conley. I think it will not be cheap, and I think it will strain luxury taxes and people will clutch their pearls,
Mhm.
and it will be a big story, and it has right to be a big story because it has ramifications. But if you're on this path and you are 22-7, and Mike Conley is one of the Rudy Gobert whisperers, and Mike Conley is shooting like 45% from three, and about half of those threes come on high pick and roll step backs with Rudy Gobert, then what in the world are you thinking about breaking up the duo when they're both on the tail end of their career and you're not going to get what they're worth in
And what you're
trading?
thinking is, if that is a question, it is we are going to make accommodations elsewhere. And that accommodations might be paying a crazy tax. It might be letting go of Kyle Anderson. It might be,
Trading Nas or Cat, right?
I think the Nas one, like that might ultimately be where it gets to next summer.
Mhm.
Like I think there's a pretty easy path to shed $14 million for next season and get a first round pick. I think you could trade Nas Reed into a team with cap space like the Spurs or something like that. And and I know this is like blasphemy for Wolves fans, but if we're having like removing all things like strictly economical, I think there's paths that this team can shed some money there. I think you could get a first and trade Nas into somebody's space. If you were
certainly easier than you could shed $60 million for Cat.
Exactly. And I'm just saying that's the one we always go to. And I think we have to recognize how much better Carl's gotten this year, how much more he's acclimated in a difficult job.
None of this, again, I'll save you the trouble. None of this is at all negative to the people we're talking about. We're talking about you've got a gallon's worth of talent and a quart and a half's worth of roster.
Yeah.
And you can't pour it all in. And if you do, then the spillage is going to be messy, and it's going to affect what you can pour in future years. And so you have to make tough decisions. And it's a wonderful problem to have if you're, I said this on a MinPost Zoom when somebody asked me about Conley and Slow-Mo and whether or not Slow-Mo's play this year has influenced my thinking. And I said it had. What I said was I would take Conley over Slow-Mo in a heartbeat. But I also said, let there be no mistake, whoever signs or gets Kyle Anderson next year is getting a great player. And I would say the same thing. If you got a 24 or whatever he's going to be year-old Nas Reed, that's worth something, for a team. That's going to be, and that's just what you're doing is you're winning now. You're the Wolves and you're going for it. And Nas Reed is the guy off the bus because you're winning now. And, you at least recoup a first-round pick to your thinking or something else. But none of this these are good problems to have.
Exactly.
These are the kinds of things. It's a hell of a lot better than saying, if we pair our 2 second-rounders and the 8th pick, we might move up to the 4th pick.
Right. Yeah. Way better. and I think, so I just looked it up. Tonight's Gobert's 100th game as a Timberwolf. So that's a clean little thing that I'm going to definitely put in the title or something here. But like it's been an adventure, and it's one that requires, I think, analysis at all the stops, including right now, which is at a really good time. And to answer the probably overly simplified question of like, would you do the trade again? These are all the things that really require unpacking, because it does tie to the financials. It does tie to the fit of the roster. What else you have there? But like you said, Finch and Conley and everybody who works there was not surprised by this at all. They understandably roll their eyes at the question. of it, and maybe we do this thing where for us to justify a trade in our heads, we have a bar set really high. And maybe that's the bar that cleanly and comfortably allows us to say the trade was a success. I think there's a gray area. And given the price that they paid and given the risk behind all of it, it's probably a pretty big gray area. But I think the Wolves are at least at a minimum there. And that's an accomplishment, and that's growth over the 100 games. And I don't know. I'm curious to see how and where Rudy can continue to grow over the course of the season, because I think he's on a mission. Like not to like prove the trade, is that he's just like, we're winning now. There he is. That dude is confident. He has a belief in this, and I'm just really interested to see, what he can do with it, because it's going about as well as he could have asked for. And it's crazy that even with that being true, it's still an open conversation of like, what does and what doesn't make sense about this trade. I'm looking for that 10 to 15% extra from Rudy. And it's a lot to ask, but I think he can do. I've seen him do more things previously. Some of the areas that he's gotten a little less sharp or hasn't been sharp at all year, it's in his game. He has it. The defensive stuff. I think there's this level. You said earlier, like, I don't know if they're going to remain the top seed or a top 2 seed in the Western Conference. If Rudy does these things, they will. And I think that's again a lot to put on him, but I think it's a big compliment to him too, that we're leaving open the idea that we can be 60 games into the season and look at it and just be like, man, look at the Wolves record. How can you not say Rudy Gobert is a top 15 player in this league right now? He's got more work to do there, and he's been doing a lot of work, to get to this point too. And we'll see where it goes. But this has somehow gone extremely long. As I was like, oh, this will be a quick one. We got a game tonight, whatever. But it's fun. There's more things to talk about in a stretch like this, where it is 5 wins and 3 losses. Right? We're highlighting positives. We're picking at things that could get better. And I don't know. I'm enjoying it, and appreciate you doing it.
Hey, my pleasure. And we'll probably continue it once the button goes off.
Exactly, or at the game tonight as we're sitting there. And I'm excited for that Mavs matchup too. That's an interesting Rudy can't do a ton in that matchup sort of game. Like,
on the other hand, he has bothered the shit out of Luka in the past.
Yeah, less so in that more recent game.
I know that was a more of a wings defensive.
Yeah. So it's but that's what I'm excited to see tonight. I'm like, Rudy's going to have watched all the film from that Dallas matchup 10 days ago or whatever it was, and be like, he's going to go, my impact wasn't what it could be in that game. Right. It wasn't. And let's see what he does tonight. I'm excited.
Also, Finch mentioned when John yesterday at practice asked about did they come in? How did the team come in after that last game? He said, I think they were bothered. And after they had a film session that wasn't pretty, but the first thing you have to do is establish accountability. So I know he ripped them a new one in the films, and they're going to be, I think Dallas on the end of a back-to-back, I'm probably eat these words in 24 hours, whatever. But Dallas coming in at the second half of a back-to-back, the Wolves having just been whooped and berated by their coach, appropriately so, for not doing their signature things. I expect a very good performance from the Wolves tonight.
Yeah, because that's becoming the assumption with this team is you assume positive intent or you assume positivity, right? They've earned that, and I think they're continuing to earn it a little bit less so through this more difficult stretch. But like you set the bar, right? You set the bar. Being 500 or above in this stretch,
25-12.
They're doing that now, and
that's
here
more than 2 wins for every loss. Mm-hmm. You do that, you're let me see, 57-24, 58-24. I don't know. It's right around there. I can't get exactly what it is, but it's, essentially more than 2 wins for every loss is, you're playing 600 ball, more than 600 ball.
And I think I said last week when we were looking at this stretch, and it was earlier in it too, I was like, I think 8-8 might even be selling them short. I think I said 10-6.
Yeah, you did.
Right. I think, and 5.
And right now they're exactly on pace.
And so let's see if they can sustain. I'm not.
Yeah, they go on the road against a really rugged. I mean, they have Dallas again and Houston, but then you've got a rugged Orlando team. You've got the Celtics right after Orlando,
back to back.
Yep. I mean, so it's and the Celtics are going to be ready. They remember that game, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. As were these 2 Kings Thunder game. Like I'm going to remember those 2 games that kind of sandwiched together Christmas as a turning point. As this is just a turning point of the season. Christmas is over. Here we go. Chapter 2. Let's see what the Wolves have for the rest of the season. I will see you at the game this evening. Obviously, y'all can be following Britt at Britt Robson for some in-game tweets there, and no column until next week, right?
Yep, that's true. My best and worst trades of.
That's what I was gonna plug. That's in there. The best and worst trades in Wolves history. Right. You could go check that one out on minpost.com. That was your little Christmas present. For
it's a non-time sensitive column when I think most of the staff. MinPost is running a skeleton staff, and it just made sense. Most of the time, a lot of the work, even as a columnist, is time sensitive. So, you don't want to look ridiculous saying something that the ensuing 3 games make look stupid. So
yeah, right. Well, you can check that out there too from Britt as we kind of start creeping towards another trade season here for the Wolves. But we got Wolves, Mavs tonight. We got Lakers, Wolves on Saturday. Britt and I will be at that Mavs game tonight. Kyle and I will talk about it tomorrow. And until then, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.